Dario Castellano had buried better men than the one kneeling on the warehouse floor, and he had done it without raising his voice. That was the thing the city never understood about him. The loud ones, the men who screamed and broke furniture, those men were the frightened ones. Dario had stopped being frightened a long time ago, somewhere between his father's funeral and the night he took everything his father's killers had built and made it his own. He was 39 years old. He owned half the waterfront, 3 judges, a state senator who still believed himself clean, and the particular hush that dropped over any room the moment he stepped into it. Every family in the city spoke his name carefully, the way you handle a blade by the flat. And in 2 years, exactly one person had ever handed him a cup of coffee without a tremor in her hand. Her name was Vera. She was his secretary. And the night he drove to her building unannounced, the night he told himself it was about the leak and nothing else, he discovered that the most dangerous person he had ever stood beside had been sitting 12 feet from his office door the entire time, smiling, taking his calls, keeping him alive without ever once asking to be thanked. But that comes later. First, you have to understand what Dario Castellano was, and you have to understand the small, ordinary thing he had let happen to himself without noticing, because the size of his fall is the whole story, and a man only falls that far from a height he forgot he was standing on. The empire he ran did not look like an empire. It looked like a shipping concern, a trucking firm, a chain of laundromats, and a restaurant on the east side where the wine list ran 4 pages and nobody ever checked the kitchen. Money came in dirty and walked out clean wearing a good suit. Men who tried to skim from him were found to have left the city suddenly, leaving no forwarding address and a wife who had learned not to ask. The police had a file on him a foot thick and not one charge that survived a Monday. He had built that from a 19-year-old kid who watched 2 men shoot his father in a parking garage and then shake hands over the body. He remembered every face. He forgot nothing and forgave less. His right hand was a man named Carmine, who had been with him since the parking garage, who had carried young Dario out of that place with a bullet in his own shoulder and never mentioned it again. Carmine was loyal the way old furniture is loyal, and he had never trusted Vera, not for a single day of the 2 years she had worked the desk outside Dario's office, and he made no effort to hide it. Here is the small, ordinary thing. Dario left his office door open. He had left it open for 2 years, against every instinct he owned, and he had told himself it was so he could hear the outer room. The truth, which he did not examine, was that from his chair the open door framed her desk, and that when her chair was empty, the room went a few degrees colder, and that he had caught himself more than once watching the door for the particular way she came back through it, files squared against her hip, already 3 sentences into telling him a thing he needed before he knew he needed it. He had memorized the order she stacked his correspondence, urgent on the bottom because he read top down, and she had decided he should end on the thing that mattered. He had memorized that she took her coffee black and never finished it. He had let a woman organize the inside of his attention the way she organized his calendar, and he had filed the whole arrangement under the heading of a man who valued competence, because the other heading was a door he had welded shut at 19 and did not intend to open. There had been one morning. She had set his cup down and he had reached for it at the same instant, and the side of his hand had come within a half inch of the back of hers on the desk, close enough that he felt the warmth come off her skin, and they had both gone still for exactly as long as it took to pretend it had not happened. And then she had finished her sentence about the Wednesday shipment, and he had picked up the cup, and neither of them had moved their hand first, which is its own kind of answer. He thought about that half-inch more than a man in his position should think about anything that was not a threat. He had decided it was nothing. He was wrong about that the way he turned out to be wrong about everything where she was concerned, and the morning he found out how wrong began, as these things do, with a shipment. It was supposed to move on a Thursday, a container off a Panamanian freighter, and it never reached the warehouse, because a rival crew was waiting at the exact gate it was routed through at the exact hour it arrived. 2 of Dario's men died on the dock. The product was gone before midnight. And the only people who had known the gate and the hour were the 7 men in the room where Dario had laid the plan out on a table, plus the woman who had typed the logistics into a calendar nobody else could open. Carmine came into the office the next morning with a phone in his hand and his jaw set like a man about to say a thing he would not be able to take back. He set the phone on the desk, screen up, a map glowing on it. "There's a burner tipped the Brennan crew." He let the silence work. "We pulled the tower data. It pinged 3 times the night before the run, all 3 off the same tower. Covers about a 6-block square on the east side." He tapped the glass. "Her block, Dario, her exact block." Dario did not look at the phone. He looked at Carmine, and he kept looking until the older man's certainty began to fray at the edges. "You're telling me Vera sold us?" "I'm telling you where the phone was. For 2 years that woman has read my mail before I read it. She knows where the bodies are. She filed them." His voice never climbed. It only got smoother, which was worse. "If she wanted me dead, I'd have been dead a long time ago, and a lot cheaper than a container. Maybe she's been waiting for a price." That was the sentence that did it. Not because Dario believed it. Because for 1/2 of 1 second before he crushed the thought, he did not entirely disbelieve it, and the fact that the doubt could exist at all sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. He had built a whole life on a single rule, which was that he never let anyone close enough to betray him. And somewhere along the way, without permission, he had let one quiet woman with careful hands become the exception, and he had not noticed it happening until Carmine put a map on his desk and made him feel a thing he had not felt since the parking garage. He told Carmine to sit on it, to touch nothing, to say nothing to anyone. Then he sat alone with the door open so he could see her empty chair, and he did the thing he was very good at and had never once turned on her, which was to take a person apart detail by detail and see what the details added up to. She wore long sleeves. Every day in July, buttoned at the wrist, and once, reaching across him to set down a folder, the cuff of her left sleeve had ridden up 1/2 inch, and he had seen the edge of something on the inside of her wrist, white and raised, the kind of scar a kitchen does not give you. She had drawn the hand back before he could read it, smooth as water closing over a stone. She corrected his Italian exactly once. He had been on the phone with a man in Palermo, switching into the dialect his grandmother spoke, and after he hung up, Vera had told him, eyes on her screen, that the word he used did not mean in Sicilian what he thought it meant, that in the old towns it was something cruder, and that the man in Palermo had been laughing at him for a full minute. Her accent on the Sicilian had not been learned perfect. It had been bone perfect. When he asked how she knew, she had given him a small smile and said she watched a lot of old movies and gone back to typing, and he had let it go because he wanted to let it go. She declined every raise, the company car, the driver, the better apartment in a building he owned. She lived 6 blocks from the office in a place with a buzzer that half worked, and when he had once told her lightly that she could afford better, she had said she liked being close to work, and there had been something under the words that he had not bothered to dig for. She never drank. She held a glass at the Christmas party and never lowered the level in it. And she never, not once in 2 years, sat with her back to a door. He had watched her drift a chair at a restaurant without seeming to, a small movement of the body, so the entrance stayed in her sightline. He had filed all of it under the heading of a careful woman who had survived something, because he was a careful man who had survived something too. He put the details on one table now. The sleeves, the scar, the Sicilian, the chair, the cheap apartment 6 blocks away that she would not leave, the 1/2 inch of warmth over a coffee cup that neither of them moved away from. He had told himself for 2 years that he had hired a remarkable secretary, and he understood, sitting in the dark with her empty chair in his sightline, that he had no idea what he had hired, and that the not knowing frightened him less than how badly he wanted the answer to be no. He should have called Carmine. He should have sent men. That was the procedure, the thing 20 years of survival had drilled into him. Instead, he stood up, took his coat, told the 2 soldiers in the hall to go home, and drove to her building himself, alone at 1 a.m, radio off, hands steady on the wheel, one sentence going around in his head like a coin in a dryer. I want to hear her tell me it isn't true. He did not let himself ask why that mattered more than whether it was. Her building had been somebody's pride in 1925 and nobody's since. The outer lock had given up years ago. He went up 4 flights because the elevator had a yellowed sign on it. The hallway smelled of other people's dinners and old paint. Her door was at the end, and as he came up the last few steps, he saw that it was not quite closed. Half an inch of dark gap showed between door and frame, and a thin line of light lay across the worn carpet. A man like Dario does not knock on a door already open. He stopped where the angle of the hall let him see in without being seen, and he looked through that half inch of dark, and the floor of the world dropped out from under him. The apartment was one room and a kitchen. He had imagined on the drive what it might be: plants, a reading chair, the small, careful life of a careful woman. None of that was there. What was there was the wall. She had cleared the long wall down to the plaster and covered it. Photographs, 100 of them or more, edge to edge, threaded with red string that ran face to face to address to date in a web so dense it looked like a circulatory system. He saw his own face on that wall a dozen times. Himself coming out of the restaurant. Himself at the cemetery on the anniversary, a day no one was supposed to know about. Himself in profile through a car window. There were maps. There were his schedules in a small, even hand. There were photographs of men he knew and men he did not, some faces marked through with a single red line, the way you cross a name off a list when the work on the name is done. And at the center of the room, at the kitchen table, under a single hard lamp, sat Vera, and she was not the woman who brought him coffee. She had a rifle broken down across a spread cloth, the long pieces of it laid in a row, and she was cleaning the bolt with a rag and a small brush, her movements so quiet the metal made almost no sound. Her sleeves were pushed past the elbow. He could see the scar on her left wrist now, the whole of it, a clean old line and a second one, and a small cluster of round white marks on the inside of her forearm that he knew, because he had seen them on hard men, were what a lit cigarette leaves when someone holds it there on purpose. Her hair was down. Her face under the lamp was the face he saw every morning, calm, attentive, present, except that all the softness she wore at the desk was simply gone, set down somewhere with her cardigan, and what was left was something honed. He had come to hear her tell him it wasn't true. He stood in the hall and looked at a wall papered with surveillance of his own life, and a woman calmly assembling a weapon at the center of it. And the only coherent thought he could form was that Carmine had been right, that he had let the most patient killer in the city sit 12 feet from his door for 2 years, and that some soft and stupid part of him had driven here alone because it wanted, more than it wanted to live, for the answer to be no. His hand moved to his coat, to the gun under it on its own. "If you draw that," Vera said, without turning, without raising her voice, in exactly the tone she used to tell him his 9 o'clock had moved to 10. "You'll do it badly because your hands are shaking, and then I'll have to take it from you, and I don't want to do that to you tonight. Come in, Dario. You're letting the heat out of the hall." He came in. He would think about that later, that the first thing he did when he learned everything he knew about her was a lie was obey her. He shut the door and put his back to it, and she set down the brush and turned in her chair to face him and folded her marked-up arms on the table and waited, the way she waited at her desk when he was deciding something and did not want to be rushed. 2 years, he said. His voice came out lower than he meant. 2 years you've been building this. Longer than 2 years. The wall's the easy part. It's just where I keep the work so I don't lose track of it. The work. He laughed once with nothing in it and gestured at his own face pinned a dozen times to her plaster. "You've been photographing me at my father's grave. You've got my Tuesday route. You've got the cemetery." His control thinned at the last word and he let it. "Nobody knows about the cemetery." "I know about the cemetery because I've been at the cemetery. Every year. 40 feet behind you in the second row, by the angel with the broken hand, watching the tree line." She held his eyes. "You go alone on the anniversary. You send the men away. You're sentimental about it, and sentiment is a window, and if I could find you there, so could anybody, so somebody had to be in that tree line, and the somebody was me. You expect me to believe you were protecting me. I don't expect you to believe anything tonight." She turned the rifle bolt over once in her fingers, then set it down and pushed it an inch away from herself across the cloth, toward the center, toward him, a small surrender of the most dangerous thing on the table. "I expect you to look at the wall properly instead of looking at the part with your face on it. You're a smart man when you're not scared. Read it." He did not want to. He read it anyway, because a person who pushes the weapon away is telling you something, and because she had never once in 2 years told him a thing that turned out to be wrong. He pushed off the door and went to the wall and made himself look at the faces that were not his. The faces with the red lines through them. He knew some of them. A man named Ostrowski who had run a crew for the Brennans and vanished 18 months ago in a way everyone had assumed was internal Brennan business. Red Line. A contractor out of Detroit whose name Dario had heard exactly once, in a wire intercept, attached to a price, his price, a contract everyone including Dario had eventually written off as rumor. Red Line. A sharp-featured woman he did not know, photographed through a cafe window. Red Line. A young man, almost a boy, with the long, careful patience in his posture that Dario now recognized, because he was looking at it on Vera too. Red Line. Under each red-lined face, in the same even hand, a date. He read the dates. He read them again. And the floor that had dropped out from under him began, slowly, to rebuild into a different shape, one he liked even less because it would not let him keep being angry, and anger had been the only thing holding him up. The dates lined up with nights he remembered. The night his car was hit and he walked away because the timer had been wrong. The night a man with a knife got into the restaurant kitchen and was found in the alley with a broken neck. He had survived a great deal in 2 years and credited his own caution, the way a man does, and the proof that he had been wrong about the source of his own survival was pinned to a stranger's wall in red string. "These are the people who tried to kill me," he said, not a question. "Everyone." Vera had not moved from the table. "That's what the wall is. That's what I am. I'm the reason you're standing in my apartment being rude to me instead of being a name on somebody else's wall." "Why?" It was the only word he had left. He turned from the wall and put it to her bare, no weight on it because there was no weight left in him to put. And for the first time since he had known her, Vera looked away, and when she answered, she did not answer with a fact. She answered with a place. There are hills above a town in the Sicilian interior, and in those hills there is a house that does not appear on any map, and the man who ran it took children who arrived without names or took their names from them, because a name is a thread back to a self, and a self is a flaw in a weapon. He had been a priest before he was the other thing, and he never gave up the habit of the booth. He liked to hear what his children had done in a small, dark confessional before he decided whether they would be punished for it. The children called him the confessor. Vera had been the kind of weapon he built once a decade. And the spring she turned 23, he had handed her a folder with the face of a young new boss in an American city, a man who had just taken his father's chair in a particularly bloody way, a man whose enemies had pooled their money for the work, because none of them had the stomach to send their own people. The face in the folder was Dario's. She did not tell him the rest as a history. She told it to the table, to her own hands, in the present tense, the way you tell a thing you are still standing inside of. And as she told it, the lamp and the kitchen went away from both of them, and there was only the thing she was describing, and this is the thing she was describing. It is raining in the cemetery, a thin, cold rain that beads on the wax of her jacket and runs off the lip of the scope. She has been on the contract 6 weeks. She knows his roots the way she knows her own hands. The cemetery is the window. He comes alone on the anniversary, sends the men to the gate, walks the gravel path himself with his hat in his hand, and she is 40 feet back and 8 feet up in the crook of a plane tree with the rifle's bipod set on a branch worn smooth, and she has him. She has had cleaner shots and never a clearer one. He stops at a grave near the angel with the broken hand, and then the man who owns half a city does the thing she did not account for in 6 weeks of planning. He looks around once to be sure he is alone, and being sure, he stops being the boss. His shoulders come down. The hand with the hat in it drops to his side and hangs there. He bends his head to the wet stone, and his other hand comes up and presses flat against the top of the marble the way you press a hand to a chest to feel if there is still a heartbeat under it. And he stands like that. A son and not a verdict. No audience, no performance, nobody to be a monster for. And his shoulders move once, twice, in the small, involuntary way shoulders move when a man is crying in the rain and does not want even God to see it. Her finger is on the trigger. It has been on the trigger for 6 minutes. She has killed 3 men before this one, and her finger has never once disobeyed her. She tells it to close. It will not close. She watches a man she has never spoken to grieve at a grave, and her own throat does a thing it has not done since she was small in the hills. A tightening, a thaw, and she understands with a cold clarity that frightens her more than any contract that the reason her finger will not close is that she has spent 6 weeks watching this man, his routines and his roots and his small mercies to the people he protects, and that somewhere in those 6 weeks the job in her own mind has turned inside out like a coat. And that she has stopped looking for the window to kill him through and started, without permission, cataloging the windows somebody else might use. She is in the tree 9 minutes. When she comes down, she has not fired, and a weapon that does not fire is a weapon that has broken, and she knows what the confessor does with broken things. That is where the present tense ended, because that was the part she could not stay inside of, and she came back to the kitchen and the lamp and the man across the table, and she finished it plainly. She had not filed the contract. The confessor came looking, because an unfilled job on a weapon like her meant she had been bought or broken and either way needed correcting. So she did the only thing the program ever taught her that she could turn against the program. She made herself dead, the kind of accident the confessor would believe, because she knew exactly what he found believable, and she walked out of her own life with the clothes on her back, and a new name she took off a memorial wall in a church she ducked into, Vera, because it had been somebody's name once and somebody had loved that somebody enough to carve it in marble, and she had never had that and wanted, for one afternoon, to borrow it. Then she had walked in his front door with a temp agency referral and asked where he kept the good pens. Dario listened the way a man listens to a doctor who is not finished with the bad news. At some point in the telling, he had crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, in her sightline of the door, his own back to that door, the most defenseless posture a man like him owns, and he had not noticed himself do it. "You were the one in the trees," he said. "2 years ago, the shot that missed me and hit the headstone instead. Everyone said it was a bad shot." It wasn't a bad shot. She turned her wrist over on the table, scar up, an old habit of honesty she had thought she'd lost. "I don't miss, Dario. I have never missed. The stone was where I put it. 18 inches from your head, so close you felt the chip of it on your cheek, because I needed you to start sending 2 men to the cemetery instead of going alone, and you're too proud to do anything because somebody asks, so I made the cemetery feel dangerous instead. You started bringing Carmen the next year. You think you got cautious. You got managed. By me, for 2 years, I'm sorry. That's the part I'm actually sorry for. The rest I'd do again." He should have felt the rage come back. Everything he was, the whole architecture of the man, stood on the idea that no one moves him without his knowing, that to be managed is to be the father in the parking garage and not the son who took it all back. She had just told him she had steered his life like a hand on the back of a child's bicycle for 2 years, and that she would do it again. And he sat in her chair with his back to her door and found that what rose in him was not rage. It was the lowest and most disarming thing he owned. It was the relief of a man who has carried a weight alone so long he has forgotten it is heavy, set down for one moment by a stranger, and the discovery, terrible and sweet, that someone has been carrying the other end the whole time in the dark. "Why didn't you ask me for anything?" he said. Not the raises. He understood the raises now. "In 2 years, you never asked me for one thing." Her flat, even voice cracked, one hairline there and gone. "Because I didn't earn it. You don't get to want things from a man you came to kill. The job was to keep you breathing. Wanting more than that on top of it, that's greed, that's a luxury." She picked the brush up just to have something for her hands, then set it down because her hands, for once, were not steady either. "I get to stand in the tree line. I don't get to come in out of the rain. Those were the terms. I set them myself. I've kept to them. Those are terrible terms. They're the only terms I had." Lamp buzzed. A pipe knocked somewhere below. And in the small, ordinary apartment with the extraordinary wall, the man who frightened a whole city and the woman who had been quietly frightening it back on his behalf sat with 3 feet of cheap wood between them, and neither reached across it, and the not reaching had its own gravity, a thing with mass, the same mass as a half-inch of warmth over a coffee cup 2 years long. He came right up to the edge of the thing he had welded shut at 19. He opened his mouth. That was when the buzzer rang, not the broken one downstairs, the one on her door, 3 short, a pause, too long. Vera was on her feet before the second long one finished, and the change in her was total and instant, the honed thing now the whole of her. She had the bolt back in the rifle, and the rifle assembled in under 4 seconds. Hands that had been unsteady a moment ago, now nothing of the kind. And she crossed to the wall and killed the lamp and put her body between Dario and the door, all in one motion he could barely follow. "That's a recognition signal," she said, low, fast, no fear in it, all information. "Program signal, 3 short, 2 long. A handler's at the door and he expects it answered." Her eyes went to the wall, to a thin gray man photographed at distance outside a cathedral, the only photo on the wall with no red line through it. "He's not dead. I always knew he wasn't dead. You don't get the confessor's red line until you've seen the body, and nobody has ever seen his body." "You said you made yourself dead. You said he believed it." "He did for 3 years. Somebody told him otherwise recently, somebody in your house." Her jaw worked. "Dario, the leak, the shipment, the burner on my block. The burner was mine. I tipped the Brennans about that container myself." The floor tried to drop a 3rd time, and he refused it. "You sold us out." "I sold you a container of cut product, and 2 men I begged you to leave home, and you wouldn't. And I will carry those 2 men to my own grave. I tipped a run I knew was watched because I needed to flush the rat in your organization to the surface, and the only way to flush a rat is to give it cheese it can't resist and watch who comes running. Somebody in your house has been talking to my old life. The container was the cheese. The burner pinging my block was the trap. I wanted whoever it was to bring it to you and point you at me, because the moment they did, they'd have to surface, and I'd have my answer." Her breath went thin and even, the breath of a person settling onto a long shot. "I just didn't think you'd come yourself. I thought you'd send him. I had a whole plan for if you sent him. I have no plan at all for you being here." Below the door in the hall, a voice spoke, gentle, patient, almost kind. A voice built for a small, dark booth. "Serafina, open the door for me, child. I've come a very long way to hear your confession." Dario watched her go to stone at the name. Not Vera. Serafina. The name the woman across the table had not heard spoken aloud since she was a girl in the hills. The name that came before the program took her name. And the way her whole body locked at the sound of it told him more about what had been done to her than the scars or the burns or the wall. And a cold thing that had been forming in his chest since a parking garage 20 years ago found, at last, a new and worthy direction. "That's him," he said very quietly. "That's him." "How many?" "With him, 2 at least, probably 3. He doesn't travel light when he's collecting a defect." She was doing math behind her eyes, and Dario realized the math was not how to win. It was how to win with him in the room, a different and worse equation, and that she was about to choose a version of it where the cost landed on her. He watched her glance at the window, at the fire escape, at him, and he watched her face settle into the flat calm she wore at the desk. The calm he now understood was the face she made right before she did a thing that would cost her. "No," he said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to put me out the window." A flicker. "It's a clean drop to the alley. There's a car 2 blocks east, gray sedan, keys in the wheel well. I keep it for you. You've been driving past it for a year. Go down, go east, do not look back, and in 20 minutes you forget my name and I become a thing that didn't happen to you." She racked the bolt, soft, final. "That's the job, Dario. The job was always to get you out of the room alive. Let me do my job." In the hall, the gentle voice again, closer to the wood now, almost a lover's. "Serafina, I taught you that a closed door only insults the man outside it. Don't insult me. Bring out the gentleman you let in and we'll discuss terms. I have no quarrel with Mr. Castellano. I have a quarrel with a daughter who lied to her father about being dead." The obscene tenderness of it was the thing that finished Dario. He stood up out of the chair, slowly in the dark, and he did not reach for the window. He reached for her. He took the long pieces of the night, the wall, the 9 minutes in the rain, the 2 years of steady coffee, the half-inch of warmth, the terms in which she got to stand in the tree line and never come in, and he set them all down, and he put his hand over the barrel of the rifle and pressed it gently down and to the side until it pointed at the floor. "Here is what is not going to happen," he said, and his voice was the smooth, quiet one that emptied rooms, except that under it now there was something warm and terrible she had never heard in it. You are not going to die in a one-room apartment to buy me a fire escape. I have spent 2 years being managed by you, and you were very good at it, and I am going to allow it to continue in every part of my life except this one. This one is mine." He moved his hand from the barrel to her jaw and held it the way you handle the flat of a blade, and she let him, which was the most extraordinary thing either of them had done all night. "You said you don't get to come in out of the rain. Those were terrible terms. I'm voiding them. I'm your employer. I have the authority." She looked at him in the dark, and the honed thing and the flat calm both went out of her face at once, and underneath was only a woman who had been 23 and crying in a tree because she could not kill a man who wept at his father's grave, and her voice came apart, the syntax of it going the way real feeling goes. "I can't, Dario. I can't have a thing and protect it. I have never once had a thing. The second I want you alive for me instead of just alive, I'm slower. I hesitate. I did it in the cemetery. I'll do it again. Wanting is the flaw, he taught me. Wanting is the flaw, and he's right behind that door. Please, please get out the window." "No," he said again, and then the door came in. It did not come in with a kick. Sala was too old and too elegant for kicks. It came in with a small charge on the lock, a flat clap and a puff of splinters, and then the gentle gray man stood in the ruined doorway with 2 younger men flanking him and a third behind. A slim pistol held loose at his side, the way a priest holds a censer, and he looked into the dark apartment with the mild interest of a man surveying a garden he planted long ago. "There she is," Gennaro Sala said, and he smiled, and the smile was the worst thing in the room. "Look how she's grown." Vera had put Dario behind her in the half-second between charge and door, her body a wall, the rifle up and level, and Sala looked at it and tutted, soft, disappointed, a teacher at a sloppy sum. "A rifle, indoors, at this range." He clicked his tongue. "I taught you better. You point a long gun at a man in a small room and you've given him the time it takes to close the distance. You knew that at 12. He took one unhurried step in, and his men fanned, and his mild eyes moved past her to Dario, assessing, pricing. "Mr. Castellano, forgive the hour and the door. I'll have it repaired. I'm not here for you. You've been a remarkably well-kept man for 2 years, and now I understand why, and I'm honestly delighted to have it explained. My investment did not waste herself after all. She simply chose a longer assignment than the one I gave her." The smile again turned to Vera, the smile of pure ownership, a man looking at a thing he made. "Come home, Serafina. The debt for the dead years is steep, but I'm a forgiving man. You of all people know how forgiving, and there's work that only you can do. Put the gun down, say you're sorry, we'll begin." And Dario watched Vera's hands on the rifle begin to lower. Not in surrender. He saw it half a beat after it started, and his heart climbed his throat. She was doing the exact thing Sala had just told her not to do, lowering the long gun in the small room, and Sala's mild eyes flicked to it with the satisfaction of a man whose lesson had landed. His weight shifting onto his front foot to close the distance the way he'd lectured her was the smart play. And that was the trap inside the trap, because Vera had not lowered the rifle to obey and had not lowered it from fear. She had lowered it to give the confessor exactly the opening his own teaching told him to take, and the instant he took it, the instant his front foot committed, and his attention narrowed to the dropping barrel, she let the rifle go from her hands entirely and was already inside his reach. She had a blade out of her sleeve, the long sleeve, the reason for the long sleeve, and she moved the way nothing he had ever paid for moved. The next 4 seconds happened faster than they can be told. The first flanking man got 1 round into the wall above Dario's head and never got a second, because Vera came off Sala's body sideways with a low economy that put her under the muzzle. Dario, who had a gun in his own hand now and 20 years of his own bad nights, took the second man through the shoulder and again through the chest as he turned, because for all that he had been managed and protected, Dario Castellano had never once been anybody's helpless thing, and he did not intend to start tonight in front of her. The third man, the one in the hall, ran, because men run from the program's flagship weapon when she comes off a body in the dark. That left the gentle gray man, who had a slim pistol and a great deal of theory and one terrible old assumption, which was that he understood her. He had built her. He believed there was no version of Serafina whose hand he could not predict, because he had personally taught the hand every single thing it knew. And in this, he was wrong, and the place he was wrong was the only place that ever mattered. He had taught her that wanting is the flaw, that to love a thing is to be slowed by it, to hesitate over it, to put yourself between it and the door and lose the half-second that ends you. He had carved it into her with a cigarette and a small dark booth, and he had believed it so completely that he had bet his life on it, because his whole read of the room was that the girl would freeze the instant the rich man behind her was in danger, the instant her wanting woke up, and that her freeze was the gap he would shoot her through. So when she let the rifle fall, he read it as the hesitation he had been waiting 20 years to be proven right about, and he stepped into it smiling. He learned, in the last clear second of his life, that he had been wrong about the one thing he had ever been certain of. Vera did not hesitate. The wanting did not make her slow. It made her certain. It took the long, even patience he had built into her and gave that patience a reason, and a weapon with a reason is not slower than a weapon without one. It is the most dangerous thing in the world. She crossed the last of the distance and took the pistol out of his hand and put him on the floor of the apartment whose door he had blown off. And she knelt over the man who had named her and unnamed her and burned her and taught her that she did not deserve to come in out of the rain. And she leaned down close, the way he used to lean close in the booth. And whatever she said too low for Dario to hear. And the gentle smile went off Gennaro Sala's face for the first time and the last. And then it was over. The room was very quiet. The lamp was still off. The only light was the streetlight through the window, laying a long pale bar across the wall of photographs. Dario stood in the middle of it with a gun warm in his hand, and his ears ringing and 3 men down, and he watched her kneel there a moment longer, her shoulders moving once in the dark in the exact way his own had moved in a tree line 2 years before, the way shoulders move when a person is finally allowed to set down a thing they have carried since they were a child, and he did not go to her. He understood, the way he understood everything about her now, that she needed the moment, and he gave it to her, and the giving was its own kind of love, the first he had ever managed that did not come with a price on it. When she stood and turned to him, the rifle and the blade and the honed thing were all gone, set down with the bodies, and what faced him across the wreck of her one room was only a tired woman with a streak of someone else's blood on her cheek, and her dead father at her feet, and her whole secret life torn down off the wall behind her. And she looked at him the way she had never once let herself look at him across a desk, which is to say she looked at him like she was allowed to. "You weren't supposed to see any of this," she said. The break was still in her voice, and she let it stay. "You were supposed to go down the fire escape and forget my name. That was the whole plan. Get you out of the room alive and never let you know how close it always was. I'm a smart man when I'm not scared. You told me that, so let me be smart for 1 minute." He crossed the room. He did not handle her like a blade this time. He put his hand against the side of her face where the blood was, and his thumb wiped the streak of it slow and clean off her cheekbone, and she let out a breath that shook the whole length of her, and he felt the exact moment her terrible terms finished dying, 2 years of them, the tree line, the rain, the chair by the door, the half-inch over a coffee cup. "For 2 years I have been the safest man in this city, and I thought it was me. I thought I was just that good. It turns out the safest thing about my life was a woman 6 blocks away who wouldn't take a raise because she didn't think she'd earned the right to want me back. You don't get to decide alone anymore whether you've earned a thing. That was always a 2-person vote, and you only ever let 1 person cast it. I'm casting the other one. You're in out of the rain. The terms are void. Come in." She put her forehead against his chest. She did not put her arms around him. Not yet. She had not been touched in kindness enough times to know where her arms went, and he understood that too. And he simply held the back of her head with one hand the way you hold a thing that has been dropped too many times. And they stood like that in the dark in the ruined apartment with the long pale bar of streetlight on the wall of his own pinned faces, and not one word more was said. Because both of them already knew the real subject, and neither had ever needed it named. They did not stay, of course. A man like Dario does not leave 3 bodies in an apartment 6 blocks from his office. He called the one number he trusted, and within the hour the right men came, and by morning the apartment had become a thing that had not happened, the door repaired. The walls stripped to plaster. The photographs gone to ash in a drum on the waterfront. Gennaro Sala vanished as completely as he had once made his children vanish, leaving no body for anyone to confirm and no red line for anyone to draw. But there is one more turn, and it is the kind that does not arrive as new information. It arrives as the last piece of a thing that has been sitting in front of you the whole time. In the gray of early morning, in the back of Dario's car with the city sliding past the tinted glass, Vera, who was not finished being Vera and not yet ready to be only Serafina, told him the thing she had said to Sala on the floor too low to hear, because she found she could not let it be a secret between them, not after the wall. He thought I lowered the rifle because he ordered me to. He thought wanting you would make me freeze. That's what he built me to believe, what he burned into me when I was small, that the day I loved a thing was the day I died, because a person who loves can be aimed. Hold the person they love and the weapon does anything you want. She looked out the window. He aimed 100 people that way, through the people they loved. That was his whole genius. Find the thing a person wants kept alive and you own the person. What did you tell him? She turned from the glass, and the flat, even desk voice was gone for good, and what was in its place was the rawest thing he had ever been handed. I told him he was right that loving you changed the equation, and wrong about which way. That it made me certain instead of slow, and that was the one variable he never solved for because he never loved anything, so he never knew it could go the other way. And then I told him the part that mattered. I told him the program didn't make me. It made the weapon. The girl in the tree line who couldn't pull the trigger on a man crying in the rain. The girl who chose a name off a marble wall because somebody once loved a stranger enough to carve it. That girl was always there underneath. And he never got to her. Not with the cigarettes, not with the booth, not with any of it. He thought he'd unmade me down to nothing and built a tool on the empty ground. He never reached the bottom. There was always somebody home. That's the last thing he heard. That he failed at the one thing he was proudest of. And Dario understood then, the final shape of it, the thing the whole night had been turning toward without his seeing. The confessor had built her to love nothing, because a person who loves can be aimed. And the proof that he had failed, the proof that there had always been somebody home behind the weapon's eyes, was not the night she defected, and not the night she came off his body in the dark. The proof was 2 years long. It was every steady cup of coffee. It was a chair drifted so the door stayed in her sightline, because someone she would not name sat at the desk on the other side of it. It was a cheap apartment 6 blocks away she would not leave, because 6 blocks is close enough to reach a man in trouble in 11 minutes, and far enough that he would never know she stood guard over his sleep. It was the half-inch of warmth over a coffee cup that neither of them moved away from on a Tuesday morning a year ago. It was the raises she declined, because to be paid for it would have made it a job, and it had stopped being a job in a tree line in the rain a year before he ever learned her face. There had always been somebody home, and the somebody had spent 2 years, against every term she set herself, quietly and invisibly in love with the man whose calls she answered. He did not say any of that. He had finally learned from her the one thing a man like him is worst at, which is to leave the true thing unspoken because both people already hold it. He reached across the back seat in the gray light and found her hand where it lay on her knee, the left one, the one with the old scar at the wrist, and he turned it over, scar up. The way she turned it over when she told the truth, and he laid his own palm flat against it and held it there, and he felt the small, round marks of the burns under his fingers like a braille. He intended to spend the rest of his life learning to read. The car turned onto the waterfront. The water was the color of pewter, and the gulls were up, and a freighter sounded its horn long and low across the harbor. Vera, who had never in her life sat with her back to a door, sat with her back to the whole city and her hand open in his, watching the man instead of the room. And for the first time in 20 years of being the most frightening person in any space, she entered. She let herself be the one who was watched over, just for the length of a drive, just until the next thing, and her thumb moved once across the back of his hand and stayed. Serafina, he said, trying the real name, the carved-in-marble name, the one nobody had spoken with love in it since the hills. Say it again, she told him, and her voice, the steadiest voice in the city, came apart one final time on the 2 syllables of her own name, but slower. I want to learn what it sounds like when it isn't a confession. He said it again, slower. The freighter horn faded out across the gray water, and his thumb found the scar at her wrist, and he held it, and he said her name a third time so quietly that only she could hear it, the way you say a thing you intend to keep.